The photograph was of a young woman with defiant eyes and a sharp, intelligent face, holding a baby. On the back, in my grandfather's spidery handwriting, it read, Elena Vance and her daughter, Maya, June 1990. Robert's responsibility. The birth certificate was for one Maya Vance, born in a small town outside Houston. Father's name left blank. The letters were from Elena to my grandfather, not my father. They were respectful but firm. She didn't want money, she didn't want trouble. She just wanted him to know that his son had a daughter, and that she would be raising her on her own, away from the poison of his world. She asked only that he keep this record in case the girl ever needed to know the truth one day. My grandfather had honored her wish. He had kept the secret. I had a sister my father had abandoned, a secret he had buried for 3 decades. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. He had disowned me for choosing the wrong man, for threatening his precious public image, while he had a whole other daughter hidden away, a testament to his own moral failings. The anger that rose in me was pure, white hot, but beneath it, something else stirred, a flicker of connection, of possibility. Finding Maya took another 6 months, and nearly all the money Leo and I had saved. I hired a private investigator, a grizzled ex-cop who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found. He traced Elena Vance to Oregon, where she had passed away from cancer 5 years prior, and he found Maya. She was living in Portland, working as a senior software engineer for a boutique cybersecurity firm. She was by all accounts a genius, a prodigy who had taught herself to code at 12, and had earned a master's degree in computer science from Stanford on a full scholarship. I flew to Portland. I sat in my rental car for an hour across the street from a small, independent coffee shop, where the PI said she went every morning. I watched her walk in, and it was like looking at a distorted reflection of myself. She had the same determined set to her jaw, the same thoughtful eyes, but her were tinged with a caution I'd never had to learn. She was a woman who had clearly made her own way in the world, without the safety net I had always taken for granted. I finally worked up the nerve to go inside. I walked up to her table and said, Maya Vance. She looked up from her laptop, her expression guarded. Do I know you? No, I said, my voice unsteady. My name is Ava Croft. I think I'm your sister. The journey from that moment of raw, shocking revelation to a tentative alliance was slow and delicate. At first, she was deeply suspicious, and rightfully so. I was a ghost from a life she never knew, representing a family that had wanted nothing to do with her. I didn't push, I just laid out the evidence on the table between our coffee cups, a copy of the birth certificate, the photograph, the letters. I told her my story, the disinheritance, Caleb, my father's cruelty. I wasn't asking for anything, I just felt she had a right to know. We met for coffee every day for a week. She listened more than she talked, her brilliant mind processing decades of secrets. She told me about her life. Her adoptive parents were wonderful people, but she always felt a piece of her was missing. She was fiercely independent, driven by a need to prove herself on her own terms. It was a mirror of my own ambition, but forged in fire, not entitlement. The turning point came on the 5th day. I was ranting more to myself than to her, about Caleb. Veridian had just launched its new flagship product, a massive enterprise security suite, called Aegis. It was Caleb's pet project, the one he was pinning all his hopes on to prove his worth as CEO. The stock had gotten a temporary bump from the announcement, but I knew the truth. It's a house of cards, Maya, I said, frustration making my voice sharp. The whole architecture is flawed. He prioritized a flashy user interface, and rushed the launch to hit a quarterly target. The core encryption is a mess. It's based on a deprecated library, and I know for a fact the back-end integration is patchwork at best. He's all sizzle and no steak. It's going to collapse, and it's going to take my grandfather's legacy with it. Maya, who had been listening quietly, suddenly leaned forward. Her eyes, which had been cautious and watchful all week, were now lit with a specific intense fire. I knew all too well. It was the look of an engineer who's just spotted a fatal design flaw. A deprecated library, she asked, her voice sharp. Which one? Not Shia 1, surely. Worse, I said. He forked an old open-source framework and had his team slap a proprietary label on it. They didn't even bother to patch the known vulnerabilities. Maya was silent for a moment, then she pulled her laptop towards her, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She navigated to Veridian's public developer portal, her eyes scanning lines of code that were meaningless to a layperson. After a few minutes, she let out a low whistle. Oh, he didn't, she breathed. This isn't just patchwork, this is architectural malpractice. I could drive a truck through these back doors. They've sacrificed security for speed at every single turn. This isn't a security suite. It's a welcome mat for hackers. She looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw not a stranger, but an ally, a formidable one. Your brother isn't just a fool, she said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. He's a liability, and that was it. The spark. The birth of a plan that was so audacious, so insane, it just might work. It wasn't about revenge anymore, not entirely. It was about justice. It was about protecting the company our grandfather had built from the arrogant fool who was running it into the ground. It was about two brilliant women, cast aside by one powerful man, deciding to build something of their own. We spent the next year in secret, a two-woman insurgency. We were the perfect team. I had the insider knowledge, the company's political landscape, the personalities on the board, the simmering discontent among the senior staff Caleb had alienated. More importantly, I had the shareholder lists. Maya had the technical genius. Working in her spare time, she wrote a piece of diagnostic software, so elegant, so devastating. It was a work of art. It could scan Veridian's network, and without being detected, produce a comprehensive report detailing every single flaw in the Aegis system, predicting failure rates, data breach probabilities, and the potential financial cost of the inevitable catastrophe. It was a corporate time bomb. Our strategy was two-pronged. First, we needed leverage. Maya's report was the warhead, but we needed a delivery system. We couldn't afford to buy a controlling interest in the company, but we could rally the other owners. We could stage a proxy war. This is where my subplot with a key ally begins. I started by reaching out to the old guard, the investors who had been loyal to my grandfather. My first call was to Mr. Arthur Abernathy, a sharp, cantankerous old man who sat on the board and controlled a sizable block of shares. He had known me since I was a child, and had always been my quiet champion, frequently clashing with my father over his elevation of Caleb. I met him at his country club, a place I hadn't set foot in for years. He listened patiently as I laid out my case, his expression unreadable. I told him about Caleb's incompetence, about the shortcuts, the risks. I didn't tell him about Maya yet. I needed to know he was with me first. When I finished, he stirred his iced tea for a long time. I knew it, he finally said, his voice a low growl. I knew that boy was a peacock, all feathers and no sense. Your father is a fool, Ava. He let his pride blind him. He looked me right in the eye. I've been watching the stock bleed. I've read the hollow quarterly reports. What do you propose to do about it? I want to initiate a vote of no confidence at the next annual board meeting, I said. I want to challenge for control. He raised a skeptical eyebrow. With what army? You have no shares, child. Your father made sure of that. I don't have shares, I said, leaning forward, but I have the truth. And I have a plan to deliver it to every single shareholder who is tired of watching their investment get mismanaged. All I need from you, Mr. Abernathy, is your support, your voice, your votes. He stared at me for another long minute, then a slow, wolfish grin spread across his face. Robert Croft disowning his most valuable asset was the stupidest business decision he ever made. Count me in, Ava. Let's give them hell. With Abernathy on board, the dominoes began to fall. He opened doors I couldn't. We targeted institutional investors, pension fund managers, who were legally obligated to prioritize returns over sentiment. We used my knowledge of the company's inner workings, and Maya's devastating technical analysis, which we presented anonymously, as the findings of an independent cybersecurity consultant. The plan was working. We were building a silent army. My father and brother had no idea the ground was crumbling right under their feet. They were too busy planning the Aegis launch party to notice the revolution brewing in their own backyard. The 6 months leading up to the annual board meeting were the most intense of my life. Leo called it my symphony of vengeance, and he wasn't far off. Every day was a meticulous exercise in strategy and secrecy. Maya and I operated like a covert intelligence agency. We communicated through encrypted channels, used burner phones for sensitive calls, and met in nondescript locations across the city: a quiet corner in the public library, a noisy food truck park, the back pew of an old church. Every move was calculated to keep our ultimate goal, and Maya's existence, completely off Caleb and my father's radar. Our campaign was a proxy war, fought not with money, but with information. Our weapon was Maya's report, which we codenamed Project Icarus. It was a masterpiece of technical demolition. In 50 devastating pages, it laid bare every single flaw in the Aegis security suite. Maya had even built a predictive model, showing a 92% probability of a catastrophic data breach within the first 6 months of a full enterprise-level deployment. She estimated the potential financial fallout: regulatory fines, lawsuits, loss of client confidence, in the 9-figure range. It was a corporate death sentence. Armed with this, Mr. Abernathy and I began our silent crusade. We didn't go public. That would have given Caleb and my father time to spin a counter-narrative. Instead, we moved through the shadows of the shareholder roster. Mr. Abernathy, with his unimpeachable reputation, would secure the initial meetings with the fund managers and institutional investors. He was the respected elder statesman, lending credibility to our cause. Then I would go in. I remember the first major meeting. It was with the board of a massive teachers' pension fund that held a 3% stake in Veridian, a huge number in a proxy fight. The 5 board members sat across a table from me, their faces skeptical. They knew who I was: the disowned daughter, the family black sheep. They were expecting an emotional plea. I didn't give them one. I was calm, professional, and armed with facts. "Good morning," I began, my voice even. "I'm not here to discuss my family. I'm here to discuss your portfolio. For the past 18 months, Veridian stock has underperformed its sector index by 12%. I'm here to tell you why, and to explain why, under current leadership, that trend is guaranteed to accelerate." For the next hour, I walked them through Caleb's tenure. I used my insider knowledge to detail his litany of failures: 2 failed product acquisitions that cost the company $70 million, an exodus of top engineering talent, and a culture of fear that stifled innovation. I showed them charts and internal metrics I had memorized before I was locked out. Then I played my trump card. "My team has commissioned an independent audit of the new Aegis platform," I said, sliding a sleek black binder across the table. It was a summary of Project Icarus, with the most damning findings highlighted. The full technical report, I told them, would be made available to their cybersecurity consultants for verification. "What you're looking at," I said, my voice dropping to a serious, confidential tone, "is not a flagship product. It's a multi-million-dollar liability, waiting to happen. The current CEO has bet the company's future on a piece of software that is fundamentally, catastrophically broken." The mood in the room shifted. Skepticism turned to alarm. They asked sharp, technical questions, which I was prepared for, having spent weeks rehearsing with Maya. I answered every one calmly and precisely. By the end of the meeting, they weren't looking at me as a disgruntled daughter anymore. They were looking at me as a whistleblower with a credible, terrifying warning. They agreed to have their people verify our findings, and more importantly, they agreed to keep our meeting confidential. 2 weeks later, Mr. Abernathy received a quiet confirmation: we had their proxy votes. We repeated this process over and over: a union retirement fund in California, an investment group in Chicago, a family office in New York. Each time the story was the same: they were unhappy with the returns, but had been placated by Caleb's charisma and my father's reputation. We gave them the data to justify their discontent. We gave them a reason to act. It was slow, painstaking work, building a coalition one secret meeting at a time. All the while, Maya was my ghost in the machine, my secret weapon. She would feed me updated technical briefs, talking points, and counter-arguments to any potential pushback. She was the architect of their downfall, and they didn't even know her name. The first tremors of panic from Caleb's camp started about a month before the board meeting. He wasn't aware of the full scale of the rebellion, but he was getting whispers. A friendly fund manager might have made an offhand comment about shareholder activism. A banker might have mentioned hearing rumors of a proxy challenge. Caleb, in his arrogance, didn't believe it could be serious. He was the chosen son, the undisputed king, who would dare challenge him. His first move was to try and buy loyalty. The company announced a surprise, one-time dividend for shareholders. It was a clumsy, transparent attempt to pacify the masses. Our coalition held firm. They knew a one-time payout was nothing compared to the long-term losses they faced under his leadership. Mr. Abernathy chuckled when he heard the news. "He's throwing chum in the water," he said to me over the phone. "He thinks we're sharks. He doesn't realize we're the iceberg." When the dividend failed to quell the rumors, Caleb's paranoia kicked in. He became convinced a corporate rival, maybe Henderson Tech, was trying to stage a hostile takeover. It never once occurred to him that the threat was internal. It was a catastrophic failure of imagination, born of pure ego. He couldn't conceive of a world where I, the discarded daughter with the musician husband, could be a threat. His panic manifested in a series of increasingly erratic public statements. He gave a disastrous interview on a financial news network where he dismissed the rumors as sour grapes from our competitors, who can't keep up with our level of innovation. He looked slick and defensive, and his bluster only made our quiet, data-driven case more compelling. He ordered Veridian's security team to investigate the board members, looking for signs of disloyalty. This backfired spectacularly, deeply offending the very people whose support he needed. He was a cornered animal, lashing out blindly and making our job easier with every move. The true moment of discovery, the instant he realized the call was coming from inside the house, was an accident. One of our allied investors, a notoriously blunt hedge fund manager from New York named Sullivan, got a call from Caleb directly. Caleb was trying to bully him into publicly pledging his support. Sullivan, who had no patience for Caleb's antics, cut him off mid-sentence. "Listen, son," he'd said, his voice a gravelly bark. "I could only imagine. I'm not pledging anything. I've seen a presentation that has me seriously reconsidering my position in your company, and frankly, the person who gave it made a hell of a lot more sense than you ever have." Caleb, flustered, demanded to know who is this person, who is trying to poison my board against me. And Sullivan, in a moment of beautiful, brutal honesty, said, "It was your sister, Ava. You remember her, right? The smart one." The silence that followed, Sullivan later told me, was the most satisfying he'd ever experienced. My phone rang less than 10 minutes later. It was Caleb. I let it ring 4 times, took a deep breath, and answered. "Hello, Caleb." The voice on the other end was a strangled roar of pure fury. It was you. You're behind this, after everything this family has given you." "The family didn't give me anything, Caleb," I replied, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "You and Dad took it all away. Remember? This is pathetic, Ava. A pathetic little temper tantrum, because Daddy took your toys away. You're going to embarrass yourself, and this entire family. I will crush you. I will bury you in legal fees. You have no idea who you're messing with." I almost laughed. The threats, the condescension. It was all so predictable. It was the language of a bully who had just realized his victim was no longer afraid of him. "Is that all, Caleb?" I asked, my tone bored. "I have a meeting to get to. We can discuss this further at the annual board meeting. I believe we have a few things on the agenda. Do try to be on time." I hung up before he could respond. The silent takeover was over. The war was now in the open, and he had just discovered he'd brought a knife to a gunfight he didn't even know was happening. The panic was no longer a tremor, it was a full-blown earthquake, and the epicenter was right in his corner office. The moment Caleb realized I was the architect of the rebellion, the entire Croft family apparatus lurched into motion. It was like kicking an anthill. For 2 years they had treated me as if I were dead. Now suddenly, I was the most important person in their world. My phone, which had been silent for so long, began to ring off the hook. It was a coordinated campaign of emotional manipulation, a desperate, last-ditch effort to reassert the control they had lost. The first call, predictably, came from my father. It was the first time I had heard his voice since he had pronounced me no longer a Croft over my mother's pot roast. He didn't yell, that wasn't his style. His weapon of choice was a cold, suffocating disappointment. Ava, he began, his voice heavy with a manufactured weariness. Caleb tells me you're engaged in some unfortunate theatrics. I sat at the small desk in the spare bedroom Leo, and I had converted into our war room. Maya was sitting across from me, monitoring Veridian's internal network traffic on her laptop. She gave me a thumbs up. "Hello, Father," I said, keeping my tone neutral. I wouldn't call securing the future of grandfather's company theatrics. He sighed, a sound effect he had perfected over a lifetime of making others feel small. "This is not the way." A proxy fight, airing our family's private disagreements in front of investors, it's unseemly. It shows a lack of loyalty, a lack of respect. Respect? The word came out sharper than I intended. Was it respectful to disown me for falling in love? Was it respectful to hand my entire birthright to a man who you know is less qualified? Simply because he's your son. You're not talking to me about family loyalty, you're talking about corporate obedience. And I am no longer on your payroll. There was a stunned silence. I had never spoken to him like this before. The old Ava would have crumpled under the weight of his disapproval. The new Ava, forged in the fires of betrayal, and strengthened by a new, truer alliance, felt nothing but a cold sense of clarity. "You are making a terrible mistake," he said, his voice now laced with ice. "You are a child playing with dynamite. You have no idea the damage you are causing to the family name, to the legacy your grandfather and I built." "On the contrary," I replied, looking at Maya, who nodded in encouragement. "I'm the only one trying to save it. Caleb's mismanagement is the dynamite, and his ego is the lit fuse. I'm just trying to put it out before he blows the whole thing up. You would see that if you could look past your own pride for even a second." "This ends now, Ava," he commanded. "Call off your dogs, withdraw this nonsense. We can discuss a settlement, a trust fund, something to ensure your silence, a bribe." After everything, he thought he could buy me off. It was the ultimate confirmation that he had never ever understood me. "My silence is not for sale," I said, "and my name is not for sale. But since you brought up the subject of family, there's another member you seem to have forgotten about. Her name is Maya Vance. Perhaps you should look her up. We have a lot in common." I hung up. The satisfaction of that small act of defiance was immense. I knew the mention of Maya's name would be a grenade thrown into his carefully constructed world. It wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about all the secrets, all the lies. The next call was from my mother. Her approach was different. Where my father used cold authority, she used the sticky, cloying web of guilt. "Ava, darling," she began, her voice trembling, "your father is beside himself. You can't do this to him. You can't do this to our family." Think of the shame, the embarrassment. Where was this concern for my shame when you sat silently and watched him disown me, Mom? I asked, the old hurt bubbling up despite myself. "Where were you when Caleb was taking credit for my work for 10 years? You've spent your entire life as a professional bystander, and I'm sorry, but your season tickets to my guilt trip have expired. You're being cruel," she sobbed. "He's your father. Caleb is your brother. Blood is supposed to be thicker than water." "That's a funny phrase, isn't it?" I said, staring out the window at the Austin skyline. "People always forget the rest of the saying. The full quote is, 'The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb.' It means the bonds we choose are stronger than the ones we're born into. And I've chosen my family. It's Leo. It's Mr. Abernathy. And it's my sister Maya. The family you and Dad tried to bury." She had no response to that, just more weeping. I ended the call, feeling not triumphant, but drained. It was one thing to fight a corporate battle, to deal in numbers and proxies. It was another thing to fight your own family's ghosts. Their desperation was a form of manipulation in itself, designed to make me feel like the villain, the aggressor. They were trying to reframe my strategic rebellion as a hysterical, emotional outburst. But their panic was the ultimate proof that our plan was working. They weren't trying to reason with me, they were trying to control me. They saw my newfound strength not as a sign of my competence, but as a flaw in their system of command. They couldn't fathom that I was acting out of a logical, calculated plan to save the company. To them, I was just a woman being emotional. It was their fatal, final miscalculation. Every desperate call, every manipulative plea, only served to strengthen my resolve. It reinforced that they were not fighting to save the company or the family. They were fighting to save their own power. The power shift had already happened, they just hadn't accepted it yet. The board meeting would be the formal announcement. The day of the annual board meeting arrived cloaked in a tense gray Austin morning. The sky looked bruised. As Leo dropped me off in front of the gleaming glass and steel monolith of the Veridian tower, he squeezed my hand. "Remember who you are," he said, his eyes full of a belief that had sustained me for 2 years. "And remember what they did." I walked into that building not as the disowned daughter, but as a queen returning to claim her throne. The lobby was the same, the air thick with the scent of money and ambition. A few old colleagues saw me, their eyes widening in surprise, before they quickly looked away, not wanting to be caught in the crossfire. The elevator ride up to the 40th floor was silent, a slow ascent to a reckoning. Maya was waiting for me outside the boardroom, looking impeccably professional in a charcoal gray suit. She was holding a slim, encrypted tablet that contained Project Icarus. She looked nervous, but her eyes were steady. "Ready for this?" she asked quietly. "I was born for this," I replied, and we shared a small, conspiratorial smile. We walked in together. The room fell silent. All the players were in place. The 10 board members were seated around the long, imposing table. Caleb was at its head, looking pale but trying to project an aura of command. He shot me a look of pure venom. My father was sitting in a chair against the wall, not officially part of the meeting, but present as a looming patriarchal specter. His face was a thundercloud. He saw Maya standing beside me, and a flicker of something, shock, recognition, fear, passed through his eyes before he masked it with his usual stoicism. He knew. I took my seat, placing my folder on the table. Mr. Abernathy gave me a curt, encouraging nod. The first part of the meeting was a blur of corporate formalities, approving minutes, reviewing the painfully optimistic quarterly report Caleb had fabricated. He spoke at length, his voice a little too loud, a little too strained, about the unprecedented success of the Aegis platform's initial rollout. He was playing to the bitter end. Finally, Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat. "Thank you, Caleb. Now we move to the next item on the agenda. A motion has been brought forth by a consortium of shareholders for a vote of no confidence in the current CEO." A collective intake of breath. Caleb gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles white. "This is an outrage," he sputtered. "A baseless attack, orchestrated by a disgruntled party with a personal vendetta." He glared at me. "The numbers suggest the discontent is more than personal," Mr. Abernathy said coolly, looking at a sheet of paper in front of him. "The proxies have been filed and verified. But before we vote, I believe Miss Croft has a statement she would like to make." All eyes turned to me. This was the moment. The culmination of a year of secret planning, of a lifetime of being underestimated. I stood up. I didn't look at Caleb or my father. I addressed the board. "There will be no statement," I said, my voice clear and strong, echoing in the silent room. "My position is not based on rhetoric or emotion, it is based on data." I nodded to Maya. She stepped forward and placed her tablet on the table, connecting it to the large screen at the end of the room. With a few taps, the screen lit up with the cover page of Project Icarus, a comprehensive analysis of the architectural vulnerabilities in the Veridian Dynamics Aegis security platform. "For the past year," I continued, "my team has been conducting a deep dive analysis of Veridian's flagship product. What we found was not innovation. We found negligence on a scale that constitutes a complete betrayal of this company's fiduciary duty to its shareholders and its clients." Maya began to speak. Her voice, unlike mine, had no history with these people. It was pure, unadulterated, and terrifyingly credible. She walked the board through the core findings of her report. She didn't use jargon. She explained the complex flaws in simple, brutal terms. She showed them the shoddy code, the back doors, the ticking time bomb at the heart of their new product. With every slide, every chart, every cold, hard fact, the color drained from Caleb's face. He started to object, to bluster about proprietary information, but Mr. Abernathy cut him off. Let her finish, Caleb. She's talking about our investment. My father sat frozen against the wall, his face ashen. He wasn't just watching his son be dismantled. He was watching his entire judgment, his entire legacy, be exposed as a fraud. He had chosen this. He had chosen the son over the competent daughter. He had chosen pride over performance. And this was the result. When Maya finished, there was a dead, heavy silence. The board members looked from the screen, to Caleb, to me. They didn't look at me with pity anymore. They looked at me with respect. The vote, Mr. Abernathy said quietly. All those in favor of the motion of no confidence in Caleb Croft as CEO. My hand went up. Mr. Abernathy's went up. One by one, 6 other hands around the table were raised, a decisive, crushing majority of 8-2. Caleb looked as if he had been physically struck. You can't do this, he whispered, his voice cracking. We already have, Mr. Abernathy said. He then turned to me. The consortium that brought this motion has also put forth a recommendation for an interim CEO to guide the company through this transition, effective immediately. They have recommended Ava Croft. He looked around the table. Is there a motion to approve? It was a formality. The votes were already there. It was over. I stood up and looked directly at my father for the first time. The titan of industry was gone. In his place was just an old man, his face a ruin of shock and dawning horror. Oh, and there's one more introduction I need to make, I said, my voice carrying across the room. I put my hand on Maya's shoulder. Members of the board, I'd like you to meet the brilliant architect behind Project Icarus. This is Maya Vance. She's the lead engineer who will be spearheading the overhaul of the Aegis platform. She's also, as it turns out, my sister. If the vote was a punch, this was the knockout blow. The gasp from my father was audible. His eyes locked on Maya, and in them, I saw 30 years of buried secrets come rushing to the surface. He saw his affair, his abandonment, his hypocrisy, all standing before him, in a gray power suit, allied with the other daughter he had thrown away. The two of us, the secret and the exile. We had taken back the kingdom. Caleb sat slumped in his chair, utterly defeated. My father looked at me, his eyes pleading for the first time in his life. But he would find no mercy there. Not today. Today was for vindication. The days that followed the board meeting were a whirlwind of controlled chaos and quiet satisfaction. The official press release was sterile and corporate. Veridian Dynamics announces leadership transition. Caleb Croft had stepped down to pursue other opportunities. I was named interim CEO. The markets surprisingly reacted positively. Rumors of the near disaster with the Aegis platform had been successfully contained, reframed as a proactive leadership change to realign the company with its core values of innovation and security. The stock price, which had been bleeding for months, stabilized and then began to climb. Caleb did not go quietly. There were furious, incoherent emails. There were threats of lawsuits, all of which his lawyers quietly advised him were baseless. The proxy vote was ironclad. He was locked out of the building the same day, his personal effects couriered to his sprawling, now unaffordable mansion. My father vanished. He didn't call. He retreated into a stony, impenetrable silence, refusing to speak to me, to the board, or to the few friends who dared to inquire. He had built his world on the foundations of control and image, and we had shattered both. There was nothing left for him to say. My new office was my grandfather's old one, the one my father had stripped of all personality. Maya and I, over the course of a week, began to restore it. We found the old mahogany desk in storage and had it brought back up. We hung my grandfather's old schematics and patents on the walls. It was no longer a cold minimalist box. It was a room with a history, a soul. Our history. One evening, about a month after the takeover, Maya and I were working late, sketching out the roadmap for Aegis 2.0. We had a bottle of champagne on ice, a gift from Mr. Abernathy, who was now the new chairman of the board. Leo came by to bring us dinner, kissing me soundly, before giving Maya a warm hug. He looked around the office, at the two of us working together, and he smiled. "Look at you two," he said, his voice full of wonder. "The Croft sisters, building a better world." And in that moment, the full weight of what we had accomplished settled on me. It was never just about the money. I think you understand that. If it were about the money, I would have taken my father's desperate, last-minute offer of a trust fund. But you can't buy back respect. You can't purchase dignity. This was about value. My father had looked at me and assigned me a value of 0. He had looked at Maya, his own daughter, and decided her value was so negligible, she wasn't even worth acknowledging. He made a bad valuation. We just corrected the market. Was it revenge? I've asked myself that a lot, and I have to be honest with you. At first, no. It was about survival, then it was about justice. But when I stood in that boardroom, when I saw the look of utter devastation on my father's and my brother's faces, yes, in that moment, it was about revenge. And it was satisfying. Does that make me a bad person? Maybe. But they mistake my actions for cruelty, when in fact, they were simply consequences. They set the rules of the game. Business is business. Sentiment is a weakness, and only the strong survive. We just played the game, better than they did. We were stronger. The ultimate lesson here, the one I want you to take away from my story, is about the nature of family. My mother used to say that blood is thicker than water. But I've learned that shared values are thicker than blood. Shared respect is thicker than blood. The family I have now, the one with Leo, who saw my worth when I was at my lowest, the one with Maya, who shared my sense of justice and had the courage to fight alongside me, the one with allies like Mr. Abernathy, who chose integrity over old loyalties. That is the family that matters. That is the family that is unbreakable. We are a family, forged in a covenant of mutual respect, and that is a bond my father, with all his money and power, could never hope to understand, and could never ever break. So I want to ask you, have you ever been made to feel worthless by the very people who were supposed to build you up? Have you ever had to choose between your happiness and someone else's expectations? The world is full of people who will try to define you, to put you in a box, to assign you a value that serves their own interests. Don't let them. Your worth is not negotiable, it is inherent. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is walk away from the table, build your own, and then come back and buy the whole building. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever faced a similar battle, big or small, I want to hear about it. Share your experience in the comments below, because our stories are our strength. And if you want to hear more stories about the underestimated finally getting their due, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. You never know whose life you might change. So if you've ever been told you're not good enough, that your choices are wrong, or that your worth is tied to who you marry or what job you take, then you need to hear this. You need to hear how I took the family that threw me away and dismantled their entire world with a secret they never even knew existed. This isn't just a story about revenge, it's a story about value and how I finally learned to set my own price. It all comes down to a single moment, a single decision that's about to unfold in the coldest, most sterile boardroom you've ever seen. In a few minutes, my brother Caleb, the Golden Boy CEO of Veridian Dynamics, is going to walk in here expecting to celebrate another quarter of coasting on our grandfather's legacy. My father, Robert Croft, will be sitting in the corner, a titan of industry watching his chosen heir with pride. They think today is a formality. What they don't know is that the votes have already been counted, and the two people who are about to dethrone them are the two daughters my father tried to erase, one he disowned, and one he never even claimed. He's about to find out that blood may be thicker than water, but my sister and I, we're a flood. The air in the Veridian Dynamics boardroom is always chilled, a deliberate choice by my father years ago to, as he put it, keep the board members alert. Today it feels less like a corporate strategy and more like a tomb. I run a hand over the polished obsidian of the table, my reflection staring back, a ghost in a power suit. My husband Leo had helped me pick it out last night. He'd held it up against me, his musician's hands surprisingly steady, and said, his voice soft, you look like you own the place. The irony was a bitter pill. I didn't own the place. Not a single share, not a single brick. According to my father, I wasn't even entitled to the family name anymore. But Leo was right about one thing. I was about to. My brother Caleb will be here any minute. He'll stride in with that unearned confidence that has been his defining characteristic since we were children. He'll nod curtly at the other board members, a group of aging sycophants my father hand-picked, men who value loyalty over performance. He'll flash me a look of pure, unadulterated pity. Poor Ava, still trying to play in the big leagues, still living in that tiny apartment with that guitar player. He has no idea that Mr. Abernathy, sitting to my right and looking grim, holds the proxies for 3 major pension funds. He has no idea that the quiet woman with the laptop bag, who will be joining me shortly, the one his security team has cleared as my technical consultant, is the key that unlocks his entire kingdom of lies. He thinks I'm here as a curiosity, a bit of family drama to be indulged before the real business begins. He thinks this is his world. He's about to learn he's just a tenant, and his lease has expired. It all started, as most family tragedies do, over a pot roast. 2 years ago, to be precise. The scene is seared into my memory like a brand. The heavy cloying scent of my mother's cooking, the oppressive ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, the suffocating weight of expectation in our formal dining room. It was the annual state of the family dinner, my father's term for it, where he would assess his children's progress, as if we were quarterly reports. I was 30 years old, a senior project manager at Veridian, and I had just made the catastrophic error of falling in love. I had brought Leo home to meet them. Leo with his kind eyes and his worn-in denim jacket, his hands calloused from guitar strings, not golf clubs. He was brilliant and funny, and he saw me, the real me, not the Croft heir-in-waiting I was supposed to be. In the sterile, calculating world of the Crofts, Leo was an invasive species. My father Robert sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of polite scrutiny. My mother Eleanor flitted about, her anxiety a palpable hum in the air, and Caleb, my older brother, sat opposite me, a smug, predatory grin playing on his lips. He knew exactly what was about to happen. He'd been waiting for a moment like this my entire life. After a dinner of strained small talk, where Leo's attempts at conversation were met with monosyllabic grunts from my father and condescending questions from Caleb about how one makes a living from music, my father cleared his throat. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. He dabbed his lips with a linen napkin, placed it on the table, and fixed his gaze on me. It was the same look he used to dismantle a failing department head. Cold. Final. Ava, he began, his voice devoid of any warmth. Caleb has informed me that your relationship with this gentleman is serious. Caleb smirked, taking a slow sip of his wine, the loyal informant. I lifted my chin. It is Dad, we're getting married. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with disapproval. My mother let out a tiny wounded gasp and looked at her plate. Leo, to his credit, reached for my hand under the table. His grip was a small warm anchor in a freezing ocean. My father's eyes narrowed. I see, you understand of course, that this is not the path we envisioned for you. I have spent years grooming you, giving you opportunities. The merger with Henderson Tech is on the horizon. Their CEO, Marcus Henderson, is a fine young man, a suitable man. That was the expectation. My stomach turned. It wasn't just about my choice, it was that I had failed to follow his. I was a faulty component in his grand design. My life isn't a merger, Dad. I'm in love with Leo. Marcus Henderson means nothing to me. Love. My father scoffed, the word tasting like poison in his mouth. Love doesn't secure a legacy, it doesn't build an empire. Veridian Dynamics was built on strength, on strategic alliances, not on sentiment. He gestured vaguely at Leo, as if he were a piece of modern art he couldn't comprehend. You are a Croft. That name carries a weight, a responsibility. You will not tarnish it by marrying a transient with a guitar. The insult was so direct, so cruel, that it stole the air from my lungs. Leo's hand tightened on mine, but he remained silent, letting me fight my own battle. His name is Leo, I said. my voice shaking with a rage I had suppressed for decades. And he has more integrity in his little finger than this entire family has combined. He builds things too, Dad. He builds songs. He builds joy. Just because you can't assign a stock value to it doesn't mean it's worthless. Caleb laughed, a short, ugly bark. Oh, Ava, always so dramatic. Dad is just saying you need to be realistic. You can't throw away your birthright for a fairy tale. My birthright? I turned on him. What, to be your second in command for the rest of my life? To watch you take credit for my work while you run this company into the ground with your cheap tricks and flashy hollow projects? That hit a nerve. Caleb's smile vanished, but my father slammed his hand on the table, the silverware, jumping in protest. Enough. His voice was thunder. You have a choice, Ava. It's very simple. You end this foolishness with him. You realign yourself with the family's goals, and we can forget this unfortunate lapse in judgment. Or you walk out that door with him, and you are no longer my daughter. You will be cut off from the family, from the company, from your inheritance. Every share, every trust, every dollar will be transferred to Caleb. You will have nothing. There it was, the ultimatum, the final brutal transaction. My life for his approval. I looked at his unyielding face, then at Caleb's triumphant sneer, and finally at my mother, who was now openly weeping into her napkin, her tears doing nothing to change the course of events. And in that moment, something inside me broke. It was the last thread of hope that my father loved me, Ava, the person, and not Ava, the asset. That thread didn't just break, it vaporized. I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I looked my father dead in the eye. Then I guess I have nothing. I turned and walked out of the dining room, Leo right behind me. I didn't look back. As we reached the grand foyer, I heard my father's final, chilling words echo from the dining room, as cold and formal as a legal filing. So be it. As of this moment, you are no longer a Croft, just like that. A 30-year life, erased over dessert. It wasn't about revenge then, it was about survival. But sitting here today, in this cold, silent boardroom, waiting to take back everything he stole from me, oh, now it's about revenge. And it is going to be so sweet. The first few weeks after the disinheritance were a blur of hollow-eyed shock. It wasn't like a scene from a movie, filled with dramatic screaming matches and slammed doors. It was worse. It was a quiet administrative execution. The day after the dinner, my corporate access card stopped working. My email account was deactivated. A courier delivered a single sterile box to the small apartment Leo and I were hastily moving into. It contained my personal effects from the office, a framed photo of my grandfather, a chipped coffee mug, a wilted desk plant. There was no note, no final paycheck, just the silent, brutal efficiency of my erasure. I spent the first month in a state of suspended animation. I'd sit on the lumpy, second-hand couch in our new living room, staring at the water-stained ceiling, while the sounds of Austin drifted in through the open window. Leo would practice his guitar in the other room, the melodies soft and melancholic, as if he were trying to write a soundtrack for my grief. He never pushed. He never said, "I told you so." He would just bring me tea and sit beside me, his presence a quiet, unwavering statement of support. His family, a boisterous, loving clan of teachers and nurses from San Antonio, had welcomed me with open arms, unable to comprehend the cold calculus of my own. His mother would call and chat for an hour about nothing, her warmth a balm on my frozen heart. She'd say things like, "Family is supposed to be your safe harbor, Mia, not the storm," and I'd have to choke back a sob, because I had never known a harbor. I'd only ever known the storm. What was I supposed to do? This is the question that echoed in the silence. For 30 years, my entire identity had been wrapped up in being a Croft, and the heir apparent in waiting to Veridian dynamics. Every summer job, every university course, every decision had been geared towards that singular goal. I wasn't just working at the company, I was the company. My grandfather, the original founder, had seen the spark in me. He'd taught me to read financial reports before I could properly ride a bike. He used to sneak me into the labs on weekends, his eyes twinkling as he explained the intricate beauty of circuit boards and code. "Your father sees the business, Ava," he'd told me once, his voice raspy with age, "but you see the vision. Never forget that." But he was gone, and my father had taken over. Robert Croft was a businessman, not an innovator. He saw Veridian not as a living, breathing entity of creation, but as a collection of assets to be leveraged. And he saw his children the same way. Caleb was the flashy, charismatic asset, perfect for schmoozing investors. I was the quiet, competent one, the workhorse who actually understood the technology. My father pitted us against each other from the beginning. It was his version of a corporate stress test. I remember one project vividly. About 5 years before the split, we were developing a new proprietary encryption algorithm. I led the technical team, pulling 80-hour weeks, sleeping on a cot in my office. Caleb was nominally the project head, which meant he showed up for the occasional meeting, offered vague, unhelpful suggestions, and spent most of his time on the golf course with potential clients. We hit a major breakthrough at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. I solved a recursive loop problem that had stumped the entire team for weeks. The next day, at the all-hands meeting, Caleb presented the solution as his own. He stood at the podium, using my exact phrasing, my diagrams. My father was in the front row, beaming with pride. He stood up and clapped Caleb on the back, proclaiming, "That's my boy, a true visionary, just like his grandfather." I stood at the back of the room, invisible. My team knew. They looked at me with a mixture of pity and frustration. But what could I do? To speak up would be to declare war, to be labeled emotional, difficult. It's a classic trap, isn't it? When you're part of a toxic system, your very act of survival, of enduring the injustice quietly, becomes a form of consent. Viewers always ask, why did you put up with it for so long? The answer is complicated. It's a slow erosion of self-worth, a gradual normalization of the unacceptable. You keep thinking, if I just work harder, if I just achieve more, they'll finally see me. It's a fool's errand. The catalyst for my resolve wasn't an emotional outburst. It was, fittingly, a legal document. About 2 months after I was cast out, another courier arrived. This one delivered a thick manila envelope. Inside was a crisp, notarized document from my father's law firm. It was a formal amendment to the Croft Family Trust and my father's will. It stated, in cold, unforgiving legalese, that all shares, properties and assets previously designated for Ava Catherine Croft were now irrevocably redirected to Caleb Robert Croft. My name was crossed out, his written in. There was even a clause, a particularly cruel flourish, I was sure was Caleb's idea, stating that should he predecease our father, his inheritance would pass to his future children, and if he had none, to a charitable foundation for promising young entrepreneurs. I was written out of history, present and future. I didn't cry, I didn't rage, I just sat there, tracing the sharp, neat lines of the lawyer's signature. This document wasn't an act of anger, it was a business transaction, and that's when the grief finally hardened into something else, something cold and clear, and sharp as a shard of glass. My father didn't just disown a daughter, he had fired an employee, he had divested from a non-performing asset. Fine, I would start thinking like a CEO, and the first rule of business is to know your competition and exploit their weaknesses. My father and brother had just made their first critical error. They had underestimated their opponent. They had mistaken my love for Leo as a weakness, when in fact, it was the only thing that had made me strong enough to survive their toxicity. They thought they had left me with nothing. They were wrong. They had left me with freedom. That night, something my grandfather had told me years ago floated up from the depths of my memory. We were in his study, a dusty book-lined sanctuary that my father had since renovated into a minimalist, soulless office. I'd been complaining about Caleb getting a new sports car for his birthday, while I got a savings bond. Grandfather had smiled, that sad, knowing smile of his. Your father values things differently, Ava. He always has. He makes emotional investments, and sometimes they don't pay off. He had then opened a small locked drawer in his desk and pulled out a thin, leather-bound folder. He just held it for a moment, a strange look on his face. Everyone has secrets, he'd murmured, more to himself than to me. Debts that aren't on any balance sheet. Remember that. He never showed me what was inside, and I'd forgotten all about it until that moment, sitting in my cheap apartment with the disinheritance papers in my lap. A debt that isn't on any balance sheet. A secret. I thought about my father's frequent business trips. When I was a teenager, the hushed phone calls my mother would pretend not to hear. The rumors that always swirled around a man of his power and arrogance. It was a long shot, a desperate hunch born of fury and a faint memory, but it was a start. It wasn't about revenge yet. It was about discovery. It was about finding a truth they had tried so hard to bury. I looked over at Leo, who was watching me with concern. I held up the legal document. They think they've won, I said, my voice steady for the first time in months. They think this is the end of the story. I folded the paper and placed it on the coffee table, but I think it's just the beginning. A quiet resolve settled over me. The pain was still there, a low throbbing ache, but now it had a purpose. My father had taught me to be a ruthless business person. It was time to show him what a good student I was. My new venture wouldn't be in software or hardware. It would be in the business of truth and consequences. And I had a feeling the market was about to boom. The first step was to find that leather-bound folder my grandfather had spoken of. After his death, my father had sanitized his study, but my grandmother, a woman with a sentimental streak and a quiet defiance, had been allowed to pack up his personal effects. She lived in a sprawling retirement community in Florida, a world away from the corporate chill of Austin. I called her, my heart pounding. I kept the conversation light at first, asking about her bridge club and the weather. Then I casually mentioned, I was working on a family history project. Oh, that's lovely, dear, she said, her voice crackling over the line. Your grandfather would have liked that. He was so proud of our family's history. I know, I said, taking a breath. Grandma, do you remember when you cleaned out his study? There was an old desk, a big mahogany one. He had a locked drawer in it. Do you have any idea what happened to the things inside? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The Croft and Sons desk, she said, her voice suddenly cautious. Your father wanted to throw everything out, said it was clutter, but your grandfather, he was specific about a few things. He left me a small box, for safekeeping, he said. My pulse quickened. A box? Do you still have it? Of course, dear. It's in the back of my closet. I haven't looked at it in years. 2 days later, I was on a plane to Florida, my mind racing with possibilities. My grandmother handed me a dusty shoebox-sized container, sealed with yellowed tape. Inside, nestled amongst old war medals and faded photographs, was the thin, leather-bound folder. My hands trembled as I opened it. It wasn't a dossier of corporate secrets or hidden accounts. It was far more personal. It contained a small stack of letters, tied with a blue ribbon, a birth certificate, and a single black and white photograph.